listening to The Cooler Ring, a podcast made for manufacturing marketers. Here are Carmen Perry and Jeff White.
Welcome to The Cooler Ring, a podcast for manufacturing marketers brought to you by Cooler Partners. My name is Jeff White, and joining me today is Carmen Perry. Carmen, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Look, I'm excited for today's guest. Because we're talking. Well, we're not talking about the actual equipment, I suppose. We're talking about marketing it, but we're talking about big machines that cut trees down. Which I understand that some people may not like the idea that there are machines out there cutting trees down. But my grandfather ran a logging company for pretty much his entire life, and so I just kind of grew up around that a little bit. So it's kind of cool to be talking to someone who is in the business of marketing for a manufacturer of this kind of equipment. So I'm in I'm in my happy place, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I am as well. And I mean, another great thing is our guest is located in Canada, in La Belle Provence, to Quebec,
There you
and
go.
which is always exciting. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this about you and me, but my first gig as a designer out of university was working for the region's largest forestry company, and I spent most of my time in the woods chasing feller bunchers around with a camera. So I've seen this stuff in action. It's pretty awesome. Um, I'm excited to dive into it. So why don't we do just that?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So joining us today is Alan Rozon. Alan is the director of marketing communications at ELTEC. Welcome to the Cooler Ring, Alan.
Thank you for the invite. Love being here. So, just before I even get into myself, I actually, before I started working for this company, actually while I went to school, I was a tree planter. So I was kind of on the opposite spectrum of this industry. And I told a few people initially, "Hey, I'm going to be working for this place," and you kind of get a mixed review until you ask them. You ask the person who's kind of like, "You work for a company that destroys forests," and I go, and it was actually during the pandemic that I started working for these guys. And I said, "How do you like your lumber prices right now? How's your house built?" And so that immediately draws a slight pause. And then there was, I still personally kind of struggled with it a little bit. But I made friends with an engineer at LTech, and if you know any engineers, they always have a very logical sort of way of dissecting and processing and telling you things. And the argument, which I went and confirmed on my own afterwards, is this: as long as forestry, the practice is properly managed and it's sustainable, which is proven to be the case in a lot of areas. It's not that's not the case in some areas. But as long as you cut down the tree and you don't burn it, that's a carbon capture method. So
Hmm.
for people that are concerned about climate change, et cetera, when you look at eucalyptus tree, it's a balancing act. So there's going to be a negative impact and a consequence. But if you want to be able to build your house in any kind of way that's affordable, that isn't 3D printed, you're still going to need wood. Um,
And I've always seen forestry, probably as a result of that initial 3 year stint at JD Irving, as it's basically a completely renewable farming process. If you're managing it properly, and we can still have we can still have diverse forests, but we can also have farms of forests that are used to create a product that is absolutely needed.
Well, and there's also the methodologies which continue to evolve, and research will science is science. Science will You're supposed to question it so that it becomes better. So what you're seeing are forestry practices are shifting towards selective instead of clear cutting, and that's pretty much across the developed world. And for ones that want to do clear cut, they'll use the plantation method, which is focused on mostly on eucalyptus and jack pine. That's what we see. Jack pine in New Zealand, which isn't a native tree, but the thing grows like a weed. It's a gigantic product at the end of the day. I think they might be done, but unfortunately they were exporting most of it to China. I think that's maybe on the that might be a little less the case these days. And I'm sure will be as inevitably more sanctions are going to come through that affect the world. We had Russia as a client before the war. Just to give you an example of how a small company in a relatively isolated part of the world, which is northern Quebec, was international. It's kind of like one of these weird things where it's a longtime friend who owns this place, who never did any kind of concentrated effort for marketing because they didn't have to. They always had, their sales list was always, and still is, months, if not years, lead time. So they never had a problem selling the machines. But as the world sort of shifts and things change, and they're seeing less demand for big machines, they're seeing growing demand for smaller machines. So they're going in that direction. Now there's talk about hybrid in terms of the machine itself. Is it always going to run on diesel? Today it does. Will it tomorrow? No. What's that going to look like? So nothing is static. Everything from forestry practices to what the machine does and how it's built and what it's supposed to do, all those things are, if you're looking to lock something into a forever mode, you're probably going to fail because things are constantly changing, and this industry is no different.
Man, we bounced around fast there. But I do. First off, I want to say that I think an awful lot of manufacturing marketers find themselves working in categories that possibly their friends or the great unwashed masses don't understand, and maybe carry a negative view of because of that lack of understanding. So I do think that discussion about forestry was helpful, not just for forestry per se, but I think it's a commonality. Whether it's somebody working in in an area that is maybe tangentially related to mining and metal extraction or something of that nature. And
Listen, there's no denying that there's always a consequence. There's always going to be some level of negative impact. It's a matter of how much you mitigate it and how intelligent you are in approaching that.
Well, I do think it's kind of incumbent upon the marketers a bit to kind of
Tell that
it's good to
story.
well, and to struggle. It's okay to struggle with this narrative in order to figure it out yourself because it also helps the brand.
I'm going to give you guys a reveal, and I don't think I'm shooting myself in the foot. I won't give you the complete picture. So ELTEC, the company I work for, which makes the machines, is actually a group of companies. And one of those companies, just to show kind of like a level of fortitude. Now, of course, it's financially based because why else would you run a business? But one of the companies is called Interlube. Now, not the greatest brand name. I wasn't there to select that. But the company itself is biological, so biodegradable fluids, hydraulic, motor oil, antifreeze, all this stuff. And they cater to mining because mining is quickly shifting toward electrification underground, and they are moving to all their fluids being biodegradable, and it's a really early category. But these guys were smart enough to develop a quick company and service it, and they're growing it like crazy. Like there's the demand for it is they can't meet the demand. That's what that business is. So the reason mining is adopting this so quickly is because if they have a spill, if there's a hydraulic hose that bursts and there's a spill, it's not a contamination issue, right? So if you spill hydraulic fluid today on a mine site, the machine shuts down, the inspector has to come in, they report, they calculate the area, they calculate what they have to do to remove the ground to take it away. Like there's a work stoppage against that. If there's biodegradable hydraulic fluid in that same machine, the pipe bursts, which inevitably, heavy equipment runs into stuff like that. It's hard work, no matter how big and robust you make a machine. So hydraulic hose bursts, biodegradable hydraulic fluid spills to a certain quantity. This is all sort of governmentally regulated from a quantity perspective and all that stuff. But to a certain percentage, that spill happens. They replace the hose and keep working because the sales guy. I was working with one of the sales guys, and he was doing a presentation of the mines, and I said, "Why don't we do this?" I said, "This stuff is really like we have versions of this stuff that is completely non-toxic, right?" And he goes, "Yep." I said, "Let's put it as salad dressing on all the tables." And he's like, "Are you crazy?" I'm like, "Well, do you think you could drink it and not die or not have any negative? Like, where are you on this product? Like, how far can we go?" And so he's like, "Yeah, we didn't go quite that far. We did something else, but he took a shot of it. He drank it, and he's like, 'This is what's in your machine.'" And that's if there's not a proof of confidence in the product from a non-toxicity perspective, that was kind of like a Shazam kind of sales moment, or magic trick, so to speak.
Sham wow or something
Yeah,
maybe, huh?
yeah, that's just that was the tactic. That was the tactic. There's a PowerPoint presentation behind, and then he kind of goes like, "No, no, no." It's brilliant. It works. Now, the reason I'm saying all this, because this is another business that I work on, because it's part of this group of businesses which include ELTEC. So this business is services primarily mining. And the reason for that is because governmentally, the government has really forced mining to become much greener. And that's in this region specifically. There's a lot of lithium deposits, and they're going to be mining that to God knows what end. So they're trying to really push an environmental component so that our stuff is as clean as possible. That regulation was pushed, but it's going to trickle to other industries, including forestry. So what I'm going to be doing with the launch of the new product, which is the new website for ELTEC, is I'm just taking two pieces to a puzzle and putting them together. And it's not a prerequisite. It actually costs more to do this for the distributor and the operator, but it's inevitable. It's coming. We're gonna offer ELTEC Bio. So there's no demand for this. There's no one calling us going, "Hey, can we get your machine with biodegradable fluids in it?" Like, no one's asking for that, because why would they, right? But it's going to come from a regulatory perspective. It's going to arrive. It's inevitable. So it gives us the chance, with two existing pieces that are already under the same ownership, to create a new product and be the first at doing it. So that's the kind of stuff where I come in, and as a marketer, the perception oftentimes, especially in these environments, is you're going to come in, you're going to write copy, you're going to take pictures, you're going to do the social media, but you know what? We solve business problems too, and we create business opportunities. And that's one example, which I'm literally announcing now, which I may be shooting myself in the foot, because if it doesn't get launched for whatever reason, then I'm essentially lying at this point. But I've been working on these guys to do this for about 6 months, because there's a lot of moving parts, and there's already an issue with the pipeline to service the existing business. It's one of these businesses that's literally on a hockey stick curve. Like, they have so much demand that they can barely get enough product to satisfy it. So all I'm doing is I'm adding to that demand. So they're kind of like, "Whoa, hold on a second."
Well, let's talk about adding that demand, because, of course, the company's in the process of expanding capacity and production. And that's not something that every marketer finds themselves working in, but it's surprising. I must say, about thinking through, even the clients that we work with here at Coolan, there's a good percentage of them that are actively engaged in expanding their production facility. So it is it is a bit of a consistent challenge in some ways for at least a slice of manufacturing marketers to say, we have this pipeline today. We have what feels like excessive demand, but we also now know that we're 5 months away, or 6 months away, or 1 month away, or whatever it is, from that capacity coming on stream. What's it? I guess what are we doing to build that pipeline in advance? Because or is it required? I guess because you mentioned there's a lot of demand already.
It's actually to be with ELTEC specifically, it's kind of simple in a way. So their production facilities are going to double their production numbers, their output. Now that'll take 3 to 6 months to get to where they're flowing, and they're spinning machines out that way. But they right now, today, we have about I think it's a 6 to 8 month sales list. So there's a production schedule, and there's that many machines that have had a deposit, and that's kind of how they run. The production schedule is actually in the assembly plant, and just so everyone knows, like, that's the ones we work on, and the next ones are here, just to kind of keep it there. Once that 3 to 6 months down the road, that production is doubled, well, that 6 to 8 month lead list goes down to 3 or 4. So and when with a business that doesn't want machines sitting in the yard, that's once you get to that 3 month, you're sort of going like, okay, we don't we need more, we need more. So it's a little bit reactionary, but the reaction is this: I worked on OTDA, which is Ontario Toyota Dealers Association. So I have a dealership kind of world experience, pretty extensive actually. So ELTEC only has, I think it's, I mean, if it's 10 dealerships, I think I'm kind of on the money there. They don't have a lot of distributors. So how do you get more sales? You get more dealerships. And all it really takes, so there's a list of machines ordered, and that's that window. And then, without before I arrived, the one of the sales guys kind of like kept a sort of a rough lead list. And all I had to do, and I just did it, probably a month ago, I think. All I had to do was write kind of a nice email and gave it to him, and an HTML email with an image and stuff like that. But he'd already established the communications, and it's not that this was sort of ground through a CRM platform. This is just him on the phone and sending emails. And so with that short lead list, he took my email and he sent it, and we got a dealership. Like, it's not the model. So, and that's part of the reason why, I'm sort of shifting the way I work, is because I'm not really in the business of demand generation. I'm in the business of demand, like I'm sustaining demand. I'm used to being in a position where it's Pepsi versus Coke, and you want half a point market share increase. How much you have to spend to get that? That's kind of that's where I came from, and that's not what it is today. Now their plan is to grow into a company that has another manufacturing plant, turn it into a large corporation as opposed to a family business. Today it's still a family business. The plan is to grow it into something that sort of can compete on a larger stage with some of the competitors that are out there. Now, some of the competitors are still private. The one that we get compared most to is Tiger Cat. Tiger Cat's everywhere. They're global. The funny thing about ELTEC, for as small as it is, it's also global. And the what could be perceived as a weakness from not having all of the sort of the tools in place to process requests and do that, what that actually does as an alternative, what actually occurs is it gives the sense of a personalized service. So when you call, it's a person. There's no ticket assigned to request. There's none of that stuff. But if you want to scale the business, it's going to be inevitable. It's a necessity if you want to get to a point where you're servicing a true global sort of distribution model where you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of machines being spit out every year. They're not that yet. So on the flip side, I've tried to use the things that seemingly are lacking, and I've repositioned them as strengths. So the way we get dealerships on is, when I call Caterpillar, they don't answer me for 2 days. When I call ELTEC, I got the person on the phone when I call them. So, I look at all those things and I go like, I assume myself coming in, that's a weakness. And in the long term, as you scale up, it will be. But today, right now, it's actually a strength.
Trying to guess who it was. It was SMED. They were a interior wall for offices and whatnot manufacturer based out of Calgary, that was eventually purchased by Hayworth out of Michigan, I believe. And they had for the longest time, if you called SMED, the phone picked up before it rang. I don't know what they had in their system or what kind of, like, you would never hear the phone ring. You would call them and it would just pick up, and it was the person. And that was designed. So you're saying, oh, we just don't have the efficiencies yet. Well, I think even as you incorporate those efficiencies, you can find ways to deliver on that service.
Oh, no, listen, I mean, I can't say too much, but there is a lot of, so as the building expands, the message is clear that other things need to change and evolve as well. So, I don't want to get into too many specifics, because we've also run into a scenario where, as a small manufacturer, uh, we, how can I say this without saying it? We've been targeted uh, for various things that come down to corporate espionage. And so the systems we're putting in place are to raise our level of security and all that stuff. We're going to have a VoIP system for calls. Today it's still a landline. So you get there, we have a receptionist. There's a receptionist who's at the front desk and she takes all the calls and she redirects them. Like it's still that way. So yeah, the things you're mentioning, I'm well aware of. I launched Vonage in Canada way back in the day, so I'm super familiar with VoIP. Um, all the other things that I've mentioned, from CRM to sort of extendable or cloud-based ERP solutions and a help desk and all, they will come. I've been the carrier of the torch, um, but there needs to be, I can't do this alone. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to corral buy-in, kind of similar to the extent where I've been able to convince ownership of providing a product that has never been requested in terms of a forestry product, biofluid forestry product. It takes a while for the message, and then they got to hear it sometimes from somewhere externally, and then they go, yeah, I've been hearing that from my guy internally, and then next thing you know, it starts to move. They are very much, the logo for the business is by loggers for loggers. That's not a coincidence. The guy, my friend who owns this, whose name is Patrick, his father and his grandfather, they were all loggers. Uh, that's where they came from. Like, I grew up with Patrick, but then, I went my way to Toronto and he went into the bush and he cut trees for 10 years. Like, so, he knows the machines, he knows the market for machines, he knows the manufacturers, he knows the players. And he knows how to build them at this point because they've had 12 years to figure that out and get it to a place where it's kind of like, yeah, these things run really well. But when it comes to talking about share of voice from an advertising perspective, when you've kind of tried or not tried to spend any dollars on advertising, what's the point, right? I've got 8 months. I've got an 8-month waiting list. Why would I? So all these things are coming to be, but it's not a flick of the switch. I've seen some. We've had a couple consultancies come in for various things unrelated to anything I'm speaking about today, and the consultancy, because they want to present things in a very sort of flowery way. Like, these guys are loggers, man. These guys, I did an annual report for all my activity last year. That was the first time they'd seen an annual report for marketing activity. Like, there's no one doing that before. So it's all new, and you can't expect when you're presenting all new stuff for it to kind of, it'll flick a switch in terms of like, I didn't know that. But buy in, spend money, do this, train people, all these things that come with that, the butterfly effect, so to speak. It's not small.
So it's easy to imagine in this kind of scenario where, there's no question that there are a lot of marketing challenges in a business that hasn't focused a lot on marketing, is in the early stages, um, and so it's easy to imagine the benefits that come with having a level of personal friendship or connectivity with the ownership. It's easy to imagine, that there would be some benefits that come with having that level of personal connectivity with ownership. And I've encountered a number of marketers in a similar position in the past. I'm always curious, though, what's the downside to it?
So the upside is easy. It's trust.
The upside's the simple one to me, but what's the
Yeah.
downside?
I don't want to get fired. What are you trying to do to me here?
Well, no, I
um,
mean, I'm just thinking, do you feel like it makes you, does it make it, does it change how you have to sell ideas in? I'm just thinking, for somebody listening to this, what maybe they ought to keep eyes wide open to.
yeah, my personal experience is, when I worked in ad agencies downtown Toronto for over 15 years. And in that world, you will have a true variety of clients. Like, you're not going to have the same guy twice or same woman twice. So you do have to learn how to sell to the target. And, if we're talking marketing, the owner is my target audience to sort of convey and convince of ideas or things that I think need to be done. I usually get, a nod in terms of like, that sounds good. It's not always easy to get the nod to go ahead and execute. And part of the reason is because there's a level of sophistication to marketing today, which is even way surpassed what it was, 15 years ago. That is not easy to digest. So I've tried to figure out what moves the person. How do you present stuff in a way that doesn't make them feel inundated or inadequate to sort of make a decision based on what you're telling them? So you got to figure out how to frame your argument, your conversation, your idea. You have to figure out how to frame it, because you can't frame it for the same way for every person. So what I've come to figure out with my friend is, if I have an idea and it's a result of a business problem. So what I do is I go around the office and I look for problems. So if I've got bandwidth that leaves me some space to do other things, I go around and I look, how's the training going? Is train Because they have to go out and train dealerships. It's like, can that be converted into an e-learning opportunity? Can that be transitioned as opposed to flying a guy out every time? Is there a way to gain efficiency? What do the training manuals look like? Can we put them online and turn it into a test so that they're picking multiple choice the person on the dealership end? Like, how do you gain efficiencies? I look for problems, and then I try to solve them through marketing. And one example of that is because we're playing against Caterpillar, we're playing against Komatsu, we're playing against Hyundai, we're playing against global gigantic, Sany in China. We're playing against gigantic companies that have gigantic pockets. And so one of the things our dealers were coming to us with is like, hey, we don't have it'd be great if you guys gave us a simulator. Now, simulator is basically, as I came to learn. So I went and, because I was handed over to me, because they're like, how do you do this? So I went and looked at it. I found a company in Montreal actually called D-Box, and they do it for Caterpillar, and they do it and so it's a seat in a box with a screen configuration, either horizontal or vertical or both. And it incorporates all the functionality of the machines. You got joysticks and foot pedals and all that stuff. And it's a simulator. It's a training simulator, so that when they sell a machine, the guy who's buying it or wants to buy it can try it out, actually cutting trees, virtual trees, on a simulator. Now, this thing costs in the neighborhood of 40 grand per. It may not be a huge number for Caterpillar or Komatsu or whatever. Not a small number for ELTEC. So we needed something, though. We needed, I was trying to, it's one of those things where I knew I had to look for the biggest bang for the smallest buck. So we started, I scan a lot. I monitor a lot of activity. That's kind of not expensive to do, to sort of, have feeds come in that show you when stuff is, I'm trying to push ELTEC. I've been, for about a year now, I've been pushing ELTEC forestry. So that's working a lot smoother now. So a lot of people are tagging the way I want them to. So I started noticing like Farming Simulator. And I'm actually in communicate. I have direct communication with a few with all the dealerships, but even a few operators. Like, I have a few operators who I can actually call and have conversations with. And the reason for that is because they're kind of guys that like they have drones, they like shooting stuff, and so that's a content channel from my perspective, and that's why I try to encourage it. And that's another thing. I kind of I found a nut, and then I went, oh, I'm going to plant this as a tree, and I'm going to cut it myself. So with the simulator thing, I started seeing Farming Simulator, which is a huge, gigantic PC and console game. If you haven't heard of it, I used to be a gamer. That, if I'm completely honest, that game bored the hell out of me. Like, I had no interest in going and farming or cutting trees. But within the universe of Farming Simulator, there's a subgroup that are dedicated to logging. So, they set up these custom rigs and da-da-da. So I started seeing these videos. Then I talked to these loggers that I have direct contact with. I'm like, do you play Farming Simulator? You ever play Farming Simulator? It's like, yeah, I love it. And da-da-da-da. I'm like, okay, all right. And so I started seeing all these videos, and there was a couple people who kind of made a version of ELTEC, because you can insert mods into the game. You can, with Blender and a couple other tools. It's not that difficult to kind of do your own versions of stuff. And so I was seeing some of that. And then I went like, well, what's it take for us to do this and have the whole fleet, the whole series of machines done to spec, in terms of dimensions, but also functionality. That an exact replica of ELTEC machines, but inserted in Farming Simulator. What does that look like? So I became part of the universe for a couple months. I bought the game, installed it, got to know the community, yada, yada, yada. Found several, but I had to boil it down. And I found a kid in BC who FDR logging. I'll throw his name out because he's a great kid. And he is a kid. And he's big on Farming Simulator, big on logging. Wasn't logging yet. He worked heavy equipment, but he wasn't a logger. He was a gamer essentially who did mods. He'd already done mods for ProPack and a couple other companies, but we were the first kind of like established big manufacturer to approach him with this project. And so I said like, hey man, what are the files you need and how much? He wanted to do it. He was so enthusiastic. He wanted to do it for free. And I said, no, we're not. I'm going to pay you for your time. It's obvious that you're a proponent of everything, and it's great that da da da. Because I didn't know what level of competence this guy had either. Turns out the kid's a genius. So he took our engineering file, our very, very reduced engineering spec files. I gave him all the spec sheets in terms of speed, functionality, torque, all those sort of physics-based specifications for the machine's performance. And one by one, we built out the machines. I had the platform, and I found a couple guys at ELTEC because I did like, hey, did you play Farming Simulator? And a couple guys sort of popped up as, yeah, man, I love it, blah blah blah. So I recruited them. They became part of my beta team. And over the course of I think 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5 months, he did, I think it was 8 machines, the whole series, the whole like everything that ELTEC makes, and as their latest series. And so from beginning to end, and some of it was like pulling teeth, because the engineer doesn't have time to give you files, reduced files of their work for a video game. Like that's not something they necessarily get excited about until they see it in game, actually, and then everything changed, right? But initially, some of it was like pulling teeth. But as I would get one, and then someone would come see my screen and say like, holy shit, you got the wow, and can you? And I don't know how to log, so I'm kind of like I'm the worst operator in the world on the thing, but I'm getting it. And the 2 other guys are kind of like, yeah, give me input, and it evolved. So I'm not going to tell you the price, because whoever wants to hire this kid to do that kind of work should pay them. He should ask for as much money as he can get out of them. But he did it for a very reasonable price, and he owned it. So he became we paid him to do it, and then he does all the updates, all that stuff. We offer it it's the one new web page from scratch. I modified some stuff, but it's the only new web page on the existing website that I made is for Farming Simulator. We offered it as a free download. And throughout the whole, marketing aspect of it, I just, really encouraged anyone to use hashtag ELTEC Forestry if they're going to record content. So we got, now we have logging crews that are regularly getting together with ELTEC and other machines. I mean, the realistic component is you're part of a mix necessarily. We do have a couple ELTEC crews. So once a month I'll scan YouTube and I'll look for videos that I haven't already found, and I'll put them onto the playlist that I've created, and I'll recirculate on other social media. Da, 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 da. As a result, this is kind of funny. We had a couple dealerships who called us angrily, saying, "Can you guys stop promoting this ELTEC Farming Simulator thing?" And we were kind of like, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because we're getting calls about it. Our operators are calling us, asking us technical questions about how to use the joystick, how to set up the joysticks in the game, and stuff like that." I'm kind of like, and in my head, I didn't say it, but in my head, I'm like, "Well, your phone rang because of me. You're welcome. That's beside the point. I get it. You don't want to answer those questions." But that's for me was a true measure of success when it became not only, there are metrics, rough metrics that I kind of did, and just based on the YouTube activity alone, when I did that annual report, which was, I think we were like 8 months into that thing, maybe 7, 8 months, we were already at 18 million impressions. And that's everything from game review podcasts, which get crazy numbers. So anytime ELTEC showed up and like, and we just got this new blah, 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 those guys who do, those streamers who do that stuff, they get crazy numbers. Now, am I saying that the entire universe of gamers are loggers? No, I'm not. But you would be surprised by how many loggers finish their work, jump out of the machine, go home, have supper, and jump onto their other rig in the virtual world. It was a surprising statistic in terms of the rough percentage I was able to calculate of loggers that go home and continue logging virtually. The other thing is, from an overall branding perspective, it would be harder to spend less and get more than what I did with people now knowing. So the dealerships, which is kind of, how we extend our business in terms of demand. So when we call, or the dealerships actually call, a couple of them called us. When they call, it's like, yeah, no, I saw you guys in Farming Simulator. So it's hard to get a better bang for my buck. And I'm not going to tell you guys what I spent, but it was pretty efficient.
Man, if you had told me that the way that this show is going to go is that we'd end up talking about Twitch videos of logging equipment in Farming Simulator as the as the climax of the show, I would have been surprised.
That one didn't show up on my compass either when I started this this job.
Well, let's. I think we need to wrap it up, or else we're going to go for an hour and a half here.
It'd be very easy to do so.
Yeah, I'll follow your lead, of course. Just to kind of sell myself a little bit. I do have a pretty extensive background in advertising, but today, what I'm doing with the business is I'm actually trying to future proof it. So that's everything in terms of stuff I talked about, from a CRM, ERP, help desk stuff, like that'll come. I'm the torchbearer at this point, but that'll come. But that's also further down the line, all the way to blockchain. So, eventually I know that ELTEC are going to get requests to have their machines paid for through crypto. It's going to happen. Some country is going to want to, El Salvador, if ever we get into El Salvador, they're going to want to buy their machines with crypto. There's no doubt about it. Now, am I the guy to set up the infrastructure for the financial pipeline? I can be part of the conversation, but I'm not going to set up. That's going to be the CFO. What I can do is I can lock in, because there's such a thing as crypto URLs. So eltec.crypto, eltec.nft, eltec.dao, eltec.blockchain, eltec, all those things. I bought all those things. I'm just sitting on them. I'll eventually set them up as one pager landing pages for stuff, but I'm sitting on them. And the reason I'm doing that is because we're not the only ELTEC in the world from a brand name perspective. And I don't own eltec.com, but I'll tell you what, no one else is going to own ELTEC anything else while I'm around. So, I have taken the lead, even if it's not something that's going to be fully utilized today. I have ensured that the business is much more future-proofed than perhaps even most people realize internally. And I do consider that part of my job is sometimes you got to take people by the nose hair and pull them in a place they don't necessarily want to go, because staying here is more comfortable. My job oftentimes is to take things to a less comfortable place, knowing that in the long run, it's better that you do it early than late.
I think that's some excellent advice for marketers. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us today, Alan.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to The Cooler Ring with Carmen Perry and Jeff White. Don't miss a single manufacturing marketing insight. Subscribe now at KulaPartners.com/The Cooler Ring. That's KULAPartners.com/The Cooler Ring.